Daniel Harrington had everything most people only dreamed of. His name appeared in business magazines, his companies ran in multiple countries, and his bank accounts were as full as his calendar. Yet, in his grand mansion filled with marble floors and expensive art, there was a silence that no amount of money could fill. That silence lived in the heart of his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was born mute. She could hear perfectly well, but she had never spoken a single word in her life. Her voice remained a mystery even to her father. Doctors had told Daniel early on that there was nothing wrong with her physically, no damaged vocal cords, no hearing loss. They called it a selective condition, something psychological, something deeper. But to Daniel, all that mattered was that his little girl lived in a quiet world, and he didn't know how to enter it. Most days, their home felt like two separate planets. Daniel would leave early for meetings, while Lily spent her mornings with a private tutor. They would share meals together, but those dinners were always filled with the clinking of silverware instead of conversation. Sometimes, Lily would look at her father with eyes that seemed to be searching for something. Daniel, unsure of what she needed, would give her a small smile and return to his thoughts about work. It wasn't that Daniel didn't love his daughter. He did, deeply. But love, he realized, was easier to feel than to show, especially when you didn't know how to speak her language. He had tried learning basic sign language years ago, but between his busy schedule and his own feelings of helplessness, those lessons had quietly stopped. He told himself he'd try again someday, but someday never came. On a gray, rainy Saturday morning, Daniel decided to take Lily out for lunch. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way she had been staring out the window all morning, tracing shapes into the condensation with her fingertips. Maybe it was guilt, a quiet voice, reminding him that they hadn't done anything together in weeks. Or maybe, deep down, he was hoping that outside their usual routine, something might change. He didn't choose one of the expensive restaurants he usually went to for business lunches. Instead, he drove to a small street in the older part of town, a place he rarely visited. There, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, was a cafe with warm yellow lights glowing through its windows. The sign above the door simply read, "The Maple Corner." They stepped inside, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread wrapped around them like a blanket. The cafe was small, with mismatched chairs, soft jazz playing from a corner speaker, and a glass display case filled with pastries that looked like they'd been made with love, not machinery. Lily's eyes wandered over every detail, but she didn't say anything. Of course she did. Daniel found them a small table by the window. Outside, raindrops slid down the glass, and people hurried past with umbrellas. Inside, the warmth was comforting. Daniel took off his coat and glanced at his daughter. She was sitting straight in her chair, hands folded on her lap, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from a mug at another table. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" he asked, even though he knew she wouldn't answer with words. She gave him a small nod. The waitress hadn't come yet, so Daniel leaned back in his chair, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through emails, half present, until he caught a glimpse of Lily's reflection in the window. She looked lonely, not in a dramatic, tearful way, but in a quiet, steady way that somehow felt worse. Daniel swallowed. He didn't know how to fix it. He had solved billion-dollar problems, signed contracts that made headlines, but sitting across from his own daughter, he felt powerless. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, he had this strange feeling that today might turn out differently, that something, or someone, was about to change everything. The waitress finally arrived at their table, holding a small notepad. She looked young, maybe in her mid-20s, with warm brown eyes and a smile that felt genuine. Her name tag read Maya. "Good afternoon," she said cheerfully, glancing first at Daniel and then at Lily. "What can I get for you?" Daniel ordered a cappuccino for himself and a hot chocolate for Lily, but when Maya turned to write it down, She noticed Lily's quiet, almost guarded expression. Something in Maya's eyes softened. She didn't press for words, didn't ask questions like most waiters might. Instead, she just smiled warmly, as if she understood something without being told. When she left to place the order, Daniel returned to his phone, scrolling through news articles and stock updates. It wasn't that he didn't care about Lily's company, he simply didn't know how to fill the silence between them. It had always been easier to distract himself. Outside, the rain kept falling in soft sheets, blurring the street into watercolor shades of gray. Lily watched it quietly, her small fingers tapping against her knees in an absent rhythm. The cafe was half full. At a corner table, two elderly women were laughing over tea. A man in a suit was typing furiously on a laptop. A mother with a toddler was coaxing him to eat a muffin. The hum of life filled the space, but at their table, there was only the quiet breathing of a father and daughter. When Maya returned with their drinks, she placed the steaming cup of hot chocolate in front of Lily, but instead of leaving, she crouched slightly so she was at Lily's eye level. Then, with a small, knowing smile, she began to move her hands. Daniel froze. It wasn't just a casual gesture, it was fluent, intentional. Maya was signing. Lily's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she just stared at Maya, as if trying to make sure this was real. Then, slowly, her own hands began to move in return. Daniel had seen his daughter use sign language before, of course, but never like this. Her eyes were shining, her movements quick and confident. She was talking, not with words, but with the kind of joy that made Daniel feel like he was watching her come alive for the first time in years. Maya's hands moved gracefully, her expressions changing with each sign. She laughed softly at something Lily said, then responded with equal enthusiasm. The two of them seemed to understand each other perfectly. Daniel didn't understand a single sign. He just sat there, cappuccino cooling in front of him, watching the invisible wall between his daughter and the world crack open in front of his eyes. When Maya finally stood, she turned to Daniel with that same warm smile. "She's very bright," she said softly, "and she has a lot to say." Daniel managed a nod, though his throat felt tight. You know sign language." Maya nodded. "My younger brother was deaf. I grew up speaking it every day. I don't get to use it often now, but I never forget." She gave Lily a quick smile and walked away to tend another table. Lily sat back in her chair, still glowing from the exchange. She took a sip of her hot chocolate, her small smile lingering. Daniel didn't touch his coffee. His mind was spinning. For years, he had tried and failed to reach Lily in this way, and yet, in just a few minutes, a stranger had done what he could not. She had made his daughter feel seen. Something inside him shifted, though he couldn't name it yet. All he knew was that this ordinary afternoon in a small cafe was no longer ordinary at all. Something important had just begun. For the next several minutes, Daniel found himself watching a conversation he couldn't hear, but could feel. Maya returned to their table more than once, bringing extra napkins, checking on their drinks, and each time, she signed something to Lily, and each time, Lily's face lit up like someone had switched on a light inside her. It wasn't just the way Lily's hands moved, it was the way her eyes shone, the way her posture changed. She was leaning forward, engaged, alive. Daniel realized he hadn't seen her like this in maybe ever. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. When Maya came by again, Daniel cleared his throat. "What were you two talking about?" Maya smiled as she adjusted the tray she was holding. "She told me she likes the rain. She says it sounds soft, like a lullaby." Daniel blinked. "She's never told me that." "She probably has," Maya said gently, "just not in a way you could understand." The words struck deeper than he expected. Daniel glanced at Lily, who was sipping her hot chocolate again, her small hand still resting on the table as if waiting for the next conversation. When Maya went to serve another table, Daniel tried to remember the signs he had learned years ago. Hello, thank you, I love you. But they felt rusty in his mind, like tools left in a shed too long. He clenched his hands under the table, frustration creeping in. How could he have let this part of their lives slip away? A few minutes later, Maya returned with a small plate of cookies. On the house, she said with a wink. Lily smiled and signed something quickly. She says thank you, Maya translated, though Daniel suspected she didn't really need to. The gratitude was obvious in Lily's expression. Something about Maya's presence made the cafe feel different. She wasn't just a waitress delivering food, she was a bridge. A connection Daniel didn't know he and his daughter needed until now. He found himself wanting to know more. How did you learn sign language so well? He asked when Maya had a moment to spare. Her smile softened. My younger brother, Caleb, was born deaf. At first my parents didn't know what to do. They worried he'd be left out of everything, so I started learning to sign when I was 6. By the time I was 10, we could talk about anything. He passed away a few years ago. Her voice dipped slightly at that last sentence, but she quickly recovered, keeping her tone warm. I don't use it as much now, but when I meet someone who signs, it feels like Caleb is still with me. Daniel felt a tug in his chest. He didn't know this woman beyond the last 30 minutes, yet he could see she carried her own quiet grief, just as he did. And maybe that was why she understood his daughter so quickly. She knew what it was like to lose a voice. You wished you could still hear. Lily was happily nibbling a cookie, occasionally glancing toward Maya with a shy smile. Daniel realized she had already formed a connection in a way that most people took months, even years, to build. As Maya moved on to help other customers, Daniel sat in silence, staring into his untouched cappuccino. This wasn't just a pleasant cafe visit. It felt important, like a door had been cracked open into his daughter's world, and he was being given the choice to step through. For the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't want the afternoon to end. Daniel had been to countless business meetings, charity events, and dinner parties, but he could not remember the last time he had simply watched his daughter with this much focus. Every time Maya returned to their table, Lily's whole world seemed to brighten. Her hands moved faster, her eyes sparkled, and her smile stretched wider than he had ever seen. It was as if she had been carrying words inside her for years. And now, finally, someone had given her the key to let them out. Daniel felt a strange tightness in his chest. Guilt, that was the word for it. He had told himself over and over that he was doing his best as a father. He worked hard to provide Lily with the best education, the safest home, and every comfort money could buy. But as he sat there, he realized he had neglected the one thing she needed most: connection. His gaze shifted to her small hands as they danced through the air, shaping meaning with every movement. He thought about the expensive piano lessons she had quit after only a month, the art supplies that had sat unused in her room, the books he had bought her but never read with her. Had she been trying to tell him something all along? Maya leaned over the table to place a napkin near Lily. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Daniel saw something in her expression: understanding. She didn't pity Lily. She didn't see her as broken or incomplete. She saw her as a girl with thoughts, dreams, and feelings too big to stay locked inside. When Maya left again, Daniel took a deep breath and turned toward his daughter. Lily, he said softly, hoping his voice carried some of the warmth he felt. She looked up at him, curious. I'm glad you're happy. She tilted her head slightly, then signed something he didn't understand. He frowned, wishing he could reply in her language. The frustration was sharp, like standing in front of a locked door while hearing someone you love calling from the other side. Someday, he murmured, more to himself than to her, I'm going to learn. The sound of gentle laughter pulled his attention. Maya was across the room, chatting with an elderly couple, her hands occasionally moving in small, practiced signs. She seemed to carry light with her, leaving it wherever she went. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he had met someone who felt this genuine. In his world of contracts and competition, most people wanted something from him. But Maya, she wasn't trying to impress him or win his favor. She was simply being kind. Lily tapped the table to get his attention and pointed toward the window. The rain had slowed, and thin beams of sunlight were beginning to slip through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the street. It was a small thing, but Daniel felt its symbolism. The storm was passing both outside and, perhaps, between him and his daughter. As they finished their drinks, Daniel found himself wishing they could stay longer. He didn't want this moment, this warmth, to end. For years, their outings had been quiet, predictable affairs. But today, something had shifted. Lily wasn't just present. She was alive, and it was because of a stranger who had taken the time to speak her language. When Maya returned to clear the table, she signed a quick goodbye to Lily. The girl responded eagerly, her face still glowing. Daniel stood slowly, pulling out his wallet. "Thank you," he said to Maya, and he meant it in more ways than one. "You're welcome," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his. "And, if you ever want to learn, I'd be happy to teach you." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. Then, with a small nod, he said, "I think I'd like that." As they walked out of the cafe into the damp, fresh air, Daniel glanced down at his daughter. She was smiling to herself, her hands moving idly in the air, as if still carrying on the conversation in her mind. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something powerful and unfamiliar hope. The next weekend, Daniel found himself back at the Maple Corner with Lily. He told himself it was because the cafe had good coffee. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the reason. It was because of Maya, the waitress who had managed, in a single afternoon, to open a door into his daughter's silent world. Lily recognized the cafe instantly. As soon as they stepped inside, her eyes began scanning the tables, searching for a familiar face. When she spotted Maya behind the counter, she broke into a smile so bright it almost startled Daniel. Maya noticed them too, and walked over. "Back again?" she asked warmly. Daniel smiled politely. "We liked it here." Maya crouched down to greet Lily in sign language, and Daniel watched his daughter's hands fly in response. He still couldn't understand the words, but he understood the joy. It was written all over Lily's face. When Maya left to get their drinks, Daniel found himself speaking without thinking. "She's never opened up to someone this fast," he said quietly when she returned. Maya smiled, her expression both proud and gentle. "That's because she's been waiting for someone to meet her where she is, not where they expect her to be." Her words lingered in his mind. He stirred his coffee without drinking it, glancing at Lily, who was now happily watching the rain outside. A little later, when the cafe slowed down, Maya slid into the empty chair across from Daniel. "You asked me before how I knew sign language," she began, her voice softer now. Daniel nodded. "My brother, Caleb, was born deaf," she said. "Our parents didn't know any sign language at first, so he spent the first few years of his life in almost complete silence. I couldn't stand watching him struggle, so I learned. We made up signs when we didn't know the official ones. It was our own little language, and it made him happy. It made him feel like he belonged." Her smile faded slightly. "He passed away when he was 17, a car accident, and after that, I stopped using sign language as much. It was too hard. Every time I signed, it reminded me of him." Daniel's throat tightened. He could hear the pain in her voice, even though she was trying to speak lightly. "But then," Maya continued, glancing at Lily, "I meet someone like your daughter, and it reminds me why I learned in the first place. No child should feel invisible. No parent should feel helpless." Daniel swallowed hard. "I've been both," he admitted quietly. Maya studied him for a moment, then said, You can change that. Her words were simple, but they felt like a challenge and a promise for the rest of their visit. Daniel watched as Maya patiently taught Lily new signs. Sometimes, she would slow her movements so Lily could copy her exactly. Other times, she'd make her laugh with an exaggerated expression or a playful gesture. Daniel felt like he was watching a teacher, a friend, and a sister figure all at once. When it was time to leave, Lily didn't just wave goodbye. She signed something long and heartfelt. Maya smiled warmly and replied, her hands moving with practiced grace. Outside, as they walked to the car, Daniel finally asked, Lily, what did you say to her? Lily reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small notepad, and wrote in neat, careful letters, I told her she makes the world less lonely. Daniel stood still for a moment, reading the words over and over. He realized then that this wasn't just about learning to sign. It was about learning to truly see his daughter and letting her see him in return. The following week, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He cleared an entire afternoon from his calendar. No meetings, no calls, no business trips. Instead, he drove with Lily back to the Maple Corner, determined to take Maya up on her offer. When they walked in, Maya's face lit up. You're back, she said. Then, noticing the serious look on Daniel's face, she raised an eyebrow. This isn't just for coffee, is it? Daniel shook his head. I want to learn. I want to talk to my daughter. In her language. Maya's smile widened. Then let's start now. They found a quiet corner table. Maya pulled out a small notebook from her apron and began writing down the alphabet in sign language. First, the basics, she said. She demonstrated each letter slowly, her hands moving gracefully, then had Daniel copy her movements. He was clumsy at first. His fingers felt stiff, and more than once he mixed up the shapes. But every time he got one right, Lily's eyes brightened, and she nodded in encouragement. That alone kept him going. They moved on to simple words. Hello, thank you, love, happy. Daniel stumbled over love, forgetting the exact shape, but Lily giggled silently and took his hands to guide them. The warmth of her touch made something ache inside him, not from sadness, but from the realization of how many years they had missed moments like this. Maya was patient, never rushing him. She explained that signing wasn't just about the hands, it was about expression, about letting your face and body carry the emotion. You can't just say happy, she told him. You have to show it. By the time they finished, Daniel had learned a handful of words and the alphabet. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was actually moving toward his daughter instead of watching her from a distance. When they left the cafe, Lily was still smiling. She signed something to him as they walked toward the car. Daniel recognized two of the words, love and dad. His heart tightened, and he signed love back. A little awkwardly, but with all the sincerity he had. Over the next few weeks, this became their new routine. Every Saturday, they went to the Maple Corner. They'd spend the first half-hour practicing with Maya, then the rest of the time simply enjoying each other's company. Slowly, Daniel began to understand more of what Lily was signing without needing translation. At home, he started surprising her with small conversations. He'd sign good morning at breakfast, how are you? In the car, and I'm proud of you before bed. Each time her face softened in a way that made every struggle worth it. The more he learned, the more he realized that Lily had always been ready to connect. He had simply been the one who didn't know how. And now that he was learning it, felt like they were both stepping into a brighter, warmer place together. One rainy Saturday, about a month after that first lesson, Daniel and Lily sat in their usual cafe corner, as they signed back and forth. Maya came over and placed 2 mugs in front of them. You're getting better, she said, watching their exchange. One day soon, you won't even need me to translate. Daniel smiled. That's the goal, Maya. looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "You're a good father, Daniel. Not because of what you give her, but because you're here now." Those words stayed with him long after they left the cafe. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was failing his daughter. He felt like he was finally becoming the father she had always needed. Spring arrived quietly that year. The rain had softened into gentle showers, and the streets near the Maple Corner were lined with blooming trees. Daniel and Lily still visited the cafe every Saturday, but now their time there looked completely different from that first rainy afternoon. They didn't sit in silence anymore. They signed. They laughed, Lily silently, Daniel with a soft chuckle. They shared inside jokes in a language Daniel had once been too busy to learn. One Saturday morning, Maya greeted them with a small surprise. On their table sat a gift bag, wrapped neatly with a ribbon. "For you," she said, looking at Daniel. He raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" Maya smiled. "You've finished the basics. Consider this. Graduation." Inside the bag was a slim, leather-bound notebook and a pen. On the first page, in careful handwriting, Maya had written, "Use this to write down new signs you learned together." Daniel turned the notebook toward Lily, who touched the cover gently, as if it were something precious. Then she signed, "Thank you," to Maya, her movements graceful and full of emotion. As they drank their coffee and hot chocolate, Daniel reflected on how far they'd come. A few months ago, they could barely share a meal without awkward silence. Now, their conversations flowed, not in spoken words, but in a language that belonged to both of them. Maya sat with them for a while, teaching Lily a few playful signs for cafe items: cookie thief, coffee hug, rainy day friend. Daniel watched his daughter light up, realizing that she wasn't just learning vocabulary, she was building memories. That afternoon, as they prepared to leave, Lily signed something to Maya, who smiled and looked at Daniel. "She says she wants you to sign one full sentence to her without my help before the end of today." Daniel hesitated. He knew enough now to try, but he also knew Lily would notice every mistake. Still, he nodded later. At home, they sat together on the living room couch. Lily looked at him expectantly. Daniel took a deep breath, recalling each movement Maya had taught him. Slowly, carefully, he signed, "You make my heart proud every day." Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't move. Then, without a single sound, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. He felt her small shoulders shake, and he realized she was crying, not from sadness, but from something deeper. In that moment, Daniel understood. His daughter had never needed grand gestures, expensive gifts, or constant entertainment. She had only needed him fully present, willing to step into her world instead of waiting for her to join his dot from then on. Their relationship grew in ways Daniel never imagined. They cooked together, signing about recipes. They went on walks, pointing out flowers and clouds and making up silly names for them. Sometimes, they sat in comfortable silence. But it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the peaceful quiet of two people who understood each other completely. One Saturday evening, as they left the Maple Corner, Daniel paused on the sidewalk, watching the warm light spill from its windows. He thought about that first visit, the rain, the silence, the guilt, and how one chance meeting had changed everything. He glanced down at Lily, who was walking beside him, her hand in his. She looked up and signed happy. Daniel smiled and signed it back. And he meant it, not just for her, but for himself too. The cafe faded behind them as they walked into the soft spring air, not as a distant father and a quiet daughter, but as two people who had finally found their way to each other. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of every conversation they still had left to share.